do have a passion for social justice, and it comes from my experience as a child. I grew up in South Africa at the time when it was divided, and it was quite an ugly world, black and white against each other, and class struggles, which I was involved in. And I got a sense as young as I was that for South Africa to be a peaceful country, we need a country where the laws are inclusive and everyone's potential is freed and everyone's life is improved by the fact that they're a member of our society. Well, I'll defend the Constitution, not necessarily because I was one of the writers. I honestly, truly believe that we have one of the best constitutional frameworks in the world. Firstly, it defines clearly the vision of society, and as I've indicated earlier, one of the things is the promise of a freed potential of every person and improved quality of life of every person. But it also defines the character of the state that will deliver that society. It talks about a state that is accountable, that is transparent, based on the rule of law and the supremacy of the Constitution. It provides for ethical governance. It even provides for giving priority to constitutional responsibilities, and ultimately then provides for structures that will deliver this constitutional dream. And among those structures, the drafters of our Constitution added innovative additional structures for oversight, and those include the Puppet Act. If there are problems in our road to constitutional democracy, it is because of what President Nelson Mandela once said: even the most benevolent of governments have within them propensities for human failings. I'm not suggesting, though, that we should make excuses for people who have become selfish and gluttonous in the way they do their work. I'm just saying that was anticipated. Hence, the architecture of our democracy includes multiple oversight agencies. In South Africa, interestingly, we have had some reduction of some inequality between black and white. In other words, some of us black people have been lifted into the middle class. We own property, and although we may be one paycheck away from poverty, but we live fairly good lives. But in that process, there's lots of people that are left behind. And as I said earlier, as long as there is injustice somewhere, there can't be sustainable peace anywhere. And certainly, as social injustice increases, the world cannot expect peace. In Africa, we have a concept called Ubuntu. I am because you are. And it's really was always about humanity coexisting peacefully. And Ubuntu is really, the essence of Ubuntu is that if I improve your fortunes, mine will be improved. The survival of a community is guaranteed by each member making sure that the other person or their neighbor or the person next to them is protected. Group survival protects individual survival. Corruption is a threat to everything good in society. It undermines good governance, it undermines social justice, it undermines peaceful coexistence, because one of the things that corruption undermines is good governance. And when governance fails, things fall apart. And corruption has really created dysfunctional states because it distorts policy. But the worst thing it does insofar as social justice is concerned is that it siphons societal resources into individual pockets. And the resources that should be available to advance development and collective prosperity are taken away, and which creates a problem. Can we solve corruption? I honestly believe yes, we can. I believe in South Africa, for example, there's a sense that we are very corrupt and corruption is getting out of hand. I don't think so. I think the creation of institutions such as the Pub Protector in South Africa has not only highlighted corruption as a problem, but has galvanized society to push back against corruption. Because institutions such as the Public Protector are not like courts, they supplement courts. They don't just solve the problem in a manner where society, I would say, basically society outsources democracy to these institutions. With the Public Protector, society does not outsource accountability to the Public Protector. It works with the Public Protector. Now, we've seen in South Africa, and I've seen in Africa though, in other African countries, people participating in these pushbacks against corruption. But it's not just in Africa. When we were in Malaysia, there was a big pushback there against corruption. And when I was in Malaysia, also one journalist approached me about what was happening in Turkey about corruption. They even called it Nkandla, because in South Africa we had heard Nkandla. Southern America, there's been a pushback against corruption. But what's the answer for me? Connecting the dots. Historically, when we dealt with corruption, there was civil society there, the media there, parliaments there, the executive, internal executive structures, the courts. But not having a united movement against corruption. In South Africa, we've decided that we'll deal with corruption exactly the same way as we dealt with apartheid. Have a united front against it and connect the dots among the leaders in society that are dealing with these issues of corruption in different institutions and in different formations. The truth is, globalization is inevitable. It's out of our hands. I think the question is, how do we handle it? I get a sense that what went wrong in globalization, just from where I'm sitting, are two things. One is global governance. And I've raised this at various fora where I've given a speech, including the Institute for Cultural Diplomacy, is when the good guys also do wrong things and justify them, it becomes difficult to hold the bad guys accountable. The second thing that I think went wrong with globalization is the benefits of globalization. It seems to me that the richest got super rich, obscenely rich through globalization. But at the end of the day, each country had its own left behinds. And a lot of those left behind people were not even being catered for by those we refer to as either liberals or the left. Everyone seemed to care for the middle most of the time. So your unemployed, your blue-collar workers eventually found themselves not being taken care of properly, and a lot of them are now gravitating to the right. That's scapegoating, where some of the leaders who want to be elected harvest the despair of the poor, the anger of the poor, and then they scapegoat. You say, you are poor because there are foreigners. In South Africa, you're poor because white people are like that. But at the end of the day, the reality is we need to find a way to make prosperity work for most of us without necessarily going socialist or communist. We need to find a way to make sure that there aren't people that are left behind and that the gap between the rich and poor does not keep widening or is not obscene. I honestly think when people ask people, do you believe in democracy, they have to firstly define what kind of democracy are they talking about. Because in South Africa, for example, when politicians blame democracy and say people go to court and they go to the Public Protector because they fear democracy, it's people who have an antiquated notion of democracy. As democracy is the winner takes it all, majoritarian, and parliament is supreme. In South Africa, we adopted a different kind of democracy. It's constitutional democracy, meaning If democracy is about a constant dialogue between the people and those they've entrusted with public power and resources, then in South Africa we've created multiple ways of people engaging with those they've entrusted with public power and resources. For people to then not to despair and reject democracy, we need to go back to the people to remind them that that old democracy that gives power to 1 million, for example, people who are members of a majority party is not the democracy we have in South Africa. We have a democracy in South Africa where, yes, you can engage through your political party structures, but understanding the complexity of a modern state, we've created a more complex democracy that allows you to engage through the media, through petitions, directly with politicians, through the courts, and through the public protector. As far as I'm concerned, all of that is part of democracy, but that's modern democracy. But there's nothing wrong with rethinking democracy. The democracy ideas we have were created by people who kept thinking about how do we live together in society, how do we regulate living together in a manner where none of us cheats and none of us is left behind. And there's nothing wrong with rethinking ways. But the notion of democracy for me is ideal, but how we keep working with it and expanding it as society grows is an unlimited process.